Here's the truth they don't want you to know. You possess something that terrifies most people. It's not your intelligence or your success. It's your depth. Your ability to see through the masks, to feel what others bury, to question what everyone else accepts as normal. And that depth, it makes people uncomfortable. Really, uncomfortable. Stop scrolling. You need to see this. Because if you've ever felt like you're too intense for this world, like your thoughts run deeper than the foreign conversations around you, like you see patterns others miss completely, then Carl Jung has something profound to tell you about why you're different. And more importantly, why that difference is both your burden and your gift. Everything you've been told about fitting in is wrong. Jung believed that only a rare few ever discover this truth. The depth you carry isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to transform not just you, but everyone brave enough to stay in your presence. But here's what nobody talks about. Most people will run from you instead. They'll call you too serious, too emotional, too complicated. What they're really saying is that you reflect parts of themselves they're not ready to face. If you've ever been told you overthink everything, if you've been called too sensitive, if people have walked away because conversations with you got too deep too fast, then what I'm about to share will finally explain why. Because Jung discovered something revolutionary about people like us. We're not broken. We're just operating on a completely different frequency. And once you understand these 7 signs, you'll never see yourself as too much again. You'll understand that you're exactly enough for the right people. The problem is, the right people are rare. Stay with me till the end, because the last sign is something even Jung himself struggled to explain. It's the one that separates those who merely think deeply from those who are destined to change the consciousness of everyone around them. And trust me, if you've made it this far already, you need to hear sign number 7. Sign 1. You see through social masks instantly. You walk into a room, and within seconds, you know who's authentic and who's performing. It's not something you try to do. It just happens. You see the nervous laughter that covers insecurity. You catch the micro-expressions that betray true feelings. You sense the energy shift when someone's lying. And this isn't someone. Psychic ability. Jung called this phenomenon unconscious perception, where your psyche picks up on subtle cues that most people's conscious minds filter out. Think about the last party you attended, while everyone else was caught up in small talk. About the weather or last night's game, you were probably noticing how Sarah's smile never reached her eyes, or how Mike kept steering every conversation back to his promotion. You saw the loneliness behind the laughter, the fear behind the bragging. It's exhausting, isn't it? Being unable to turn off this perception is like having X-ray vision in a world where everyone prefers their walls. Here's what Jung discovered. People with depth have what he called a permeable ego boundary. Your consciousness doesn't stop at your own thoughts and feelings. It extends into the room, picking up on the collective emotional field. You're not just observing people. You're unconsciously reading their shadows, those hidden parts of themselves they've pushed into darkness. And when you see someone's shadow before they've even acknowledged it exists, it terrifies them. The crazy part, most people don't even know why they feel uncomfortable around you. They just know that your presence makes them feel exposed, like you can see right through their carefully constructed image. They might say you're intimidating or intense, but what they really mean is that your depth threatens their superficiality. Your authenticity highlights their raw performance. Have you noticed how some people seem to confess their deepest secrets to you within minutes of meeting? Or how others practically run in the opposite direction? That's because your depth acts like a mirror, reflecting back to people exactly what they're trying to hide. Those ready for truth are drawn to you like moths to flame. Those still hiding from themselves will avoid you at all costs. But wait until you hear sign number 2. It explains why you can't enjoy surface-level conversations anymore. and why that's actually a sign of psychological evolution, not social dysfunction. Sign 2. Small talk feels like psychological torture. You're at a coffee shop, and someone starts talking about the weather. Again. Or their weekend plans to reorganize their garage. Your soul literally starts to wither. It's not that you're rude or antisocial. Jung would say you've simply evolved past the persona level of communication. You hunger for conversations about meaning, purpose, the nature of reality, why we're here, what happens when we die, how to heal childhood wounds, why humans create the same patterns over and over. Remember that friend who stopped calling because you got too philosophical? Or that date who said you were too intense because you asked about their biggest fear instead of their favorite Netflix show? Society has trained us to stay shallow, to keep conversations safe and predictable. But your psyche has broken through what Jung called the collective mask. You can't go back to pretending that surface-level exchanges feed your soul. Here's the psychological truth nobody wants to admit. Small talk is actually a defense mechanism. It keeps us from having to reveal anything real about ourselves. It maintains comfortable distance. It lets us hide behind social scripts instead of showing up as we actually are. But when you possess depth, these scripts feel like prison sentences. Every "how about this weather" is another bar on the cage. Jung believed that authentic communication happens at the level of the self, that deeper part of us that exists beyond ego and image. When you operate from this place, you're not interested in exchanging information. You want to exchange energy, meaning truth. You want conversations that change you, that make you think differently, that crack something open inside both people. The irony, the very depth that makes small talk torture for you, is exactly what the world desperately needs. We're living in an epidemic of loneliness, not because people are alone, but because they're terrified of being seen. Your refusal to stay surface level might make you unpopular at parties, but it also makes you the person people seek out when their life falls apart and they need someone who can hold space for their pain. Think about it. When was the last time small talk changed someone's life? Never. But that conversation you had at 2 a.m. about the nature of love, or that discussion about childhood trauma that made someone finally understand their patterns, those are the exchanges that actually matter. You're not broken for craving death. Everyone else is starving for it too. They've just been taught to fear it. And speaking of fear, sign number 3 reveals something that will shock you about why people actually pull away from depth. Most people think it's because deep people are too much. But Jung discovered it's actually the opposite. Sign 3. Your emotional range terrifies people. You can feel profound sadness about the state of the world, while simultaneously experiencing joy at a sunset. You can hold grief for your past self while feeling excitement about who you're becoming. You can be furious at injustice while maintaining compassion for the perpetrators. This ability to hold multiple, seemingly contradictory emotions, it's not emotional instability. Jung called it the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to unite opposites. Most people live in emotional black and white. They're either happy or sad, angry or peaceful, confident or insecure. But you live in the full spectrum. You understand that human experience isn't binary. You can feel heartbroken about a relationship ending while also feeling grateful it happened. You can be disappointed in someone while still loving them deeply. This emotional complexity is a sign of psychological maturity, but to others, it looks like chaos. Here's what really scares people: your willingness to feel everything fully. When you cry, you really cry. When you laugh, it comes from your belly. When you're angry, you let it move through you like fire. You don't suppress, minimize, or perform your emotions. You experience them. And in a world where everyone's been taught to keep it together, your emotional authenticity feels dangerous. Jung discovered that most people split off their unacceptable emotions and push them into what he called the shadow. They decide early on that anger is bad, so they become people pleasers. Or that sadness is weakness, so they become perpetually positive. But these rejected emotions don't disappear. They go underground, influencing behavior in unconscious ways. You, on the other hand, have been doing what Jung called shadow work, whether you realized it or not. You've been integrating those rejected parts, accepting your darkness along with your light. That's why you can hold such emotional complexity. You're not splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. You're showing up whole. But here's the thing that really terrifies people. When you show up with your full emotional range, it reminds them of everything they've cut off in themselves. Your sadness triggers their suppressed grief. Your anger activates their buried rage. Your joy highlights their disconnection from pleasure. You become a walking reminder of what wholeness looks like. And for people who've spent their lives fragmenting themselves to fit in, that's overwhelming. The result? They'll say you're too emotional or too intense. They'll suggest you need therapy or medication. They'll try to convince you that something's wrong with you. But Jung would tell you the opposite. The fact that you can feel the full spectrum of human emotion without being destroyed by it. That's not pathology. That's power. Number 4 is where things get really interesting, because it explains why you know things you shouldn't logically know, and why that knowing makes others deeply uncomfortable. Sign 4. You read energy like others, read words you walk into your friend's house, and immediately know they've been fighting, even though they're both smiling. You sense your coworker's depression before they've admitted it to themselves. You feel the shift in atmosphere when someone's lying. This isn't imagination or projection. Jung called it participation mystique, an unconscious connection where you literally participate in the psychological state of others. Think about the last time you were in a crowded space. While everyone else was focused on conversations and activities, you were probably overwhelmed by the emotional soup of the room, the anxiety from the corner, the sadness by the window, the fake happiness at the bar. You weren't trying to tune into these frequencies. They just flooded in. It's like having emotional synesthesia, where you can't help but perceive layers of reality that others don't even know exist. Here's what Jung understood. Consciousness isn't individual. We're all swimming in what he called the collective unconscious, a shared psychological space where thoughts, feelings, and archetypes intermingle. Most people have thick psychological boundaries that keep them separate from this collective field. But your boundaries are permeable. You're constantly downloading information from the collective, whether you want to or not. This is why you often know what someone's going to say before they say it. Why you can sense danger before it appears. Why you pick up on patterns and connections that seem obvious to you but invisible to others. Your psyche is operating like a satellite dish, picking up signals from multiple channels simultaneously. But here's where it gets complicated. When you respond to energy that hasn't been verbally expressed, people think you're crazy. You'll say, I can feel that you're angry, and they'll deny it, even though their energy is screaming. You'll distance yourself from someone who feels off, only to find out later they were deceiving everyone. You'll know a relationship is ending weeks before the breakup conversation happens. This gift comes with a price. You're constantly processing not just your own psychological material, but everyone else's too. It's exhausting. It's overwhelming. Sometimes you can't tell where you end and others begin. Jung would say, this is because you're living with one foot in the personal unconscious and one in the collective. You're a bridge between worlds. The people who fear your depth, they're terrified of this ability most of all. Because you see through their defenses without trying. You feel their hidden pain, their secret shame, their unspoken desires. And in a world that runs on hiding and pretending, someone who can read the truth in energy is dangerous. You expose the game just by existing. Don't miss sign number 5. It's the one most people deny about themselves, but once you recognize it, everything about your relationships will finally make sense. Sign 5. You transform people without trying. People either evolve rapidly in your presence, or they run. There's rarely middle ground. You've probably noticed this pattern. Someone enters your life, and within months they're having breakthrough after breakthrough. They're finally leaving toxic relationships, starting therapy, changing careers, facing truths they've avoided for years. Then they either thank you for changing their life, or they disappear completely, unable to handle the speed of transformation. Here's what's actually happening. Jung called this constellation of the unconscious. Your depth literally activates dormant parts of other people's psyches. When someone with an integrated shadow meets someone who's been repressing theirs, it creates a psychological field of tension. That tension demands resolution. Either the person must grow to match your depth, or they must retreat to maintain their defenses. You're not trying to change anyone. In fact, you probably wish people would stop changing around you because it's exhausting to constantly be someone's catalyst. But transformation happens in your presence whether you want it or not. Your authenticity makes their masks uncomfortable. Your emotional honesty makes their suppressions obvious. Your willingness to discuss shadow material makes their avoidance impossible. Think about your relationship history. How many people have said some version of you changed my life, or I wasn't ready for someone like you? How many friendships ended not in conflict, but in distance, as the other person couldn't keep up with the pace of growth required to stay in connection with you? How many times have you been blamed for someone's life falling apart, when really you just made them aware it was already broken? Jung understood that some people serve as what he called mana personalities, individuals who carry unusual psychological power. You don't generate this power. You channel it from the collective unconscious. You become a lightning rod for transformation, attracting the energy of change and conducting it into the lives of those around you. This is why people often treat you like a therapist even though you're not one. Why strangers tell you their deepest secrets. Why friends call you in crisis. Why everyone seems to need your advice but few people ask how you're doing. You've become a projection screen for others' unconscious material. They see in you what they need to see to grow. The problem is, not everyone wants to grow. Growth is painful. It requires letting go of old identities, facing difficult truths, grieving who we thought we were. Many people would rather stay comfortable in their dysfunction than do the work of transformation. And when they encounter someone like you, whose very presence demands growth, they have two choices: rise or run. This is the loneliness of depth that Jung wrote about extensively. The deeper you go in your own psychological work, the fewer people can meet you there. It's not that you're better than others. You've just traveled further into the territory of the territory, self. And that journey, while ultimately rewarding, can be incredibly isolating. Sign number 6 is the hardest truth to accept, and it's why so many rare minds end up feeling fundamentally alone in the world. Sign 6. Your questions have no simple answers while others wonder what to have for lunch. You're contemplating the nature of consciousness. While they're worried about mortgage rates, you're questioning the entire construct of modern society. You don't just ask what or how. You're obsessed with why and what does it mean. This isn't pretentiousness. Jung would say you're experiencing what he called the religious function of the psyche, the part of us that must make meaning or die trying. You've probably been this way since childhood. Remember being 7 years old, lying in bed, suddenly aware of your own existence. That existential vertigo that made you question if anything was real? Most kids have these moments, and then forget them, distracted by cartoons and candy. But you never stopped having them. If anything, they've intensified. Here's what separates you from casual philosophers. Your questions aren't intellectual exercises. They're psychological necessities. You literally cannot function without examining the deeper meaning of existence. It's not a hobby or an interest. It's as essential to you as breathing. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's drive to connect the conscious and unconscious, the temporal and eternal. The questions that haunt you have answers in books or lectures. What is the purpose of suffering? Why does consciousness exist? What happens to awareness after death? Is there meaning beyond what we create? These aren't questions that Google can answer. They're what Jung called living symbols, psychological realities that must be lived, not solved. This is why traditional education probably frustrated you. You weren't interested in memorizing facts. You wanted to understand the principles behind existence itself. You couldn't just learn history. You needed to understand why humans repeat the same patterns. You couldn't just study science. You had to know what it meant that we're made of stardust contemplating itself. People find this exhausting about you. They want to talk about promotion strategies. You want to discuss whether career success is a modern form of meaning-making that replaced religion. They want to plan vacations. You're wondering if travel is just an escape from the prison of the self. Every conversation becomes philosophical because you literally cannot engage with surface reality without immediately diving beneath it. But here's the beautiful paradox Jung discovered. The very questions that torture you are also your salvation. The meaning-making function of your psyche is what allows you to transform suffering into wisdom, chaos into order, experience into understanding. You're not cursed with these questions. You're gifted with the capacity to ask them. The price? Living with permanent existential tension. Never being able to just be happy without examining what happiness means. Never able to just live life without questioning what life is. You're condemned to consciousness, unable to return to the blissful ignorance that allows others to sleepwalk through existence. The last sign is the real game changer. It's the one that determines whether your depth becomes your greatest gift or your heaviest burden. Sign 7. You're living multiple lifetimes in one. You've died and been reborn so many times in this life that you've lost count. Not physically, but psychologically. The person you were 5 years ago. Dead. 10 years ago? Ancient history. You've been the rebel, the people pleaser, the achiever, the dropout, the lover, the loner. Each transformation hasn't been a simple change. It's been a complete death and rebirth. Jung called this the night sea journey. And while most people experience it once or twice, you're constantly cycling through death and rebirth. Here's what nobody understands. You're not indecisive or unstable. You're living out what Jung called the process of individuation at warp speed. Each version of you has been necessary, each death essential for the next birth. You're not just changing. You're alchemically transforming, burning away what no longer serves to reveal what's eternal. Think about how many times you've had to explain to old friends that you're not that person anymore. How many times family members have said, "I don't even know who you are anymore." How many times you've looked in the mirror and seen a stranger looking back. This isn't an identity crisis. It's identity evolution. You're living out multiple incarnations in a single lifetime. This is why your past feels like it belongs to someone else. Those photos from 5 years ago? That's not you. That's who you used to be. Those beliefs you held so strongly? Death. Those dreams you were so sure about, transformed into something unrecognizable. You're not attached to who you were because you know that holding on to old versions of yourself is death to who you're becoming. Jung understood that real psychological development requires what he called sacrificing the ego to the self. Most people do this gradually, carefully, maybe once or twice in life during major crises. But you're constantly offering your ego to the flames of transformation. You're willing to let everything burn if it means getting closer to truth. This is terrifying to others because it makes you unpredictable. They can't pin you down, can't figure you out, can't put you in a box. Just when they think they know you. Transform again. Your depth isn't static, it's dynamic, constantly diving deeper, constantly discovering new layers. You're not just deep, you're deepening. The multiple lifetimes you've lived have given you something rare: perspective. You Understand that identity is fluid, that who we think we are is just a temporary constellation of experiences and beliefs. You know that everything can change because you've watched yourself change everything. This gives you unusual freedom. You're not trapped by who you've been because you know you can become someone entirely new. But it also gives you unusual sadness. Each transformation requires grieving who you were. Each rebirth means accepting the death of dreams, relationships, and identities that once defined you. You carry the ghosts of all your former selves, and sometimes the weight of all those lifetimes feels unbearable. Here's what Jung knew that most people don't. This constant death and rebirth isn't pathology. It's the path. You're not supposed to find yourself and stay there. You're supposed to keep dying and being reborn until you finally discover what doesn't die. That eternal something that remains constant through all the transformations. Jung called it the self. And you're closer to it than most people will ever get. The truth? If these signs felt familiar, you don't just think differently. You are different. Jung believed minds like yours are meant to lead, not follow. Not lead in the traditional sense of power and authority, but lead in consciousness, in depth, in the courage to face what others can't. Your depth isn't a burden to be carried, it's a gift to be given, but only to those ready to receive it. The world needs people who can see through illusions, who can feel the full spectrum of human experience, who can ask the questions that have no answers, who can hold space for transformation. The world needs people who aren't afraid of the dark, who can descend into the unconscious and come back with wisdom. You're not too much. You're not too intense. You're not too deep. You're exactly what you're supposed to be, a rare soul who refuses to live on the surface. Jung would tell you that your journey isn't about fitting in. It's about individuation, becoming who you truly are regardless of what others can handle. The loneliness you feel? It's real. The depth you carry does separate you from the masses. But it also connects you to something greater, to the collective, unconscious, to the archetypal realm, to the eternal patterns that govern existence. You're not alone. You're in communion with something most people don't even know exists. So, here's my challenge to you. Stop apologizing for your depth. Stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. Stop pretending to be satisfied with shallow connections and surface conversations. The world doesn't need another person pretending to be normal. It needs you in all your depth, intensity, and complexity. Tell me in the comments, which sign spoke to you most? Which one made you finally understand something about yourself you've been struggling to accept? Because I guarantee you're not the only one who needed to hear this today. If you want more deep insights like this, hit subscribe, because your journey of self-discovery has just begun. And remember, the very depth that makes you different is exactly what makes you necessary. Jung knew it. Now you know it too. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge?